Hello everyone and welcome to a not SATO briefing video. I thought it would be interesting to do a kind of about video since this video is going to be about the S-2 tracker and the S-2 tracker air tankers. Since I'm going to be working on S-2s for the foreseeable future here, since I'm almost done with one conversion and I've got two more to go, I figured since I've had some conversations with people, maybe it would be a cool video to do some kind of history and talk about the differences between the three main types of S2 air tankers. So the S2s have been in service basically as a quick overview. They were in service in the 1950s up till the 1960s, I think it was, in U.S. military and other countries around the world. It was a great platform. The S2 overall could fly for like 9 hours and cruise at like 150 miles an hour. Um, but it had a top speed of like 250, 260 miles an hour. So it could cruise for a really, really long time, which made it ideal for being a patrol bomber, which is what it was. It was an anti submarine aircraft, basically, what the S 3 Viking became. And they ended up becoming available in this late 1960s and early 70s to be converted as air tankers, which is kind of what happened to a lot of them. Um, uh, Many contract companies here in the United States converted them, and then companies in Canada converted them, and agencies as well up there in Canada for firefighting missions. So the first S2As started flying in the early 1970s on fires, and they were through contract companies like Hemet-Valley Flying Service, Aero Union, some of those names you probably recognize. So they flew on contract up until I think it was the late 1970s when California, the state of California, then the California Department of Forestry, as you see this livery here in front of me, bought their own fleet of S2As and had them converted for firefighting. And they flew with the CDF until they became Cal Fire in the early 2000s. The S2As probably at peak were in the 1980s and early 1990s, I would say, in California service. Kind of their entire initial attack system was built around the S2 tracker and being able to get to fires quickly and put them out quickly. But Yeah, by the early 2000s, most of them had been retired and they were replaced by later the turbo trackers, which we'll get to later in this video. But Yeah, in terms of Canadian service, I can't really speak much about them up there. I know, I think it was the government of Saskatchewan had several conversions. Conair, I believe, is the one that did all their conversions up there. And obviously the Firecat, as it was known in Canada, by the Conair versions, they flew in Canada and France, I believe. Maybe I think they were on contract other places. I couldn't tell you exactly 100%. But overall wise, the S2A was a short, powerful little package. So they carried about 800 gallons of retardant, and they're about 42 feet long and had a wingspan of about 68 or 69 feet. So, and dimensionally, that will be important as I get to the later versions of the S2 here in a minute. So, uh, and note the shape of the wings and things like that. So, next we'll jump into the first of the turbine conversion S2 trackers, and that will be the Conair Turbo Firecat. Now, the first thing you'll notice about the Firecat is that the engine is different. The engine in the I didn't mention it earlier. The engine in the originals was a Wright 1820 radial engine, made about 1,625 horsepower. These the Turbo Firecats were swapped out with turbines, PT6s to be exact. And anybody who knows anything about the PT6 knows that they're not only a powerhouse, but they're super reliable engines. And they make 1,220 horsepower in this engine, so a little bit less power than the original engines, but they're a lot lighter, and it increased the overall speed of the airplane to to about 250 miles per hour. So they're significantly faster, and they're a lot lighter than a S2A even is, even with the turbine power. Now, at the cost of adding the turbines, you get the fuel burn. So the endurance went down in the turbo Firecats to about 5 hours. And some of that was alleviated by, as you see here, the two external fuel tanks, and I believe they're 75 gallons each. Um, and I think that's more of a reserve. They're kind of keeping them as a reserve. I don't believe any of the Turbo Firecats flew without external tanks. I think they all have them. Um, the other thing that's different about them is that they have a larger retardant tank. It's 897 gallons, so almost 900 gallons. So 100 gallons more than a radial engine version. And they also had a around 50-gallon foam injection system in them as well. So, say they weren't reloaded with retardant, they could inject foam into the water, which uh, is also a semi-retardant for fire. It also helps with keeping the water together and making it down to the actual ground and not be evaporated before it hits the ground. It also slightly minimizes wind drift by adding a little bit of extra mass to the water. Um, but that's kind of a modern addition, I guess you could say, with the turbine conversions. Um, I don't know where else they served other than Canada and France. They might have served other places, but those are the two places I know of for sure. Um, and overall dimensions wise, they're exactly the same as the S2As. So 42 feet long, 69 ish foot wingspan. And like I said, really externally looking at them, the only way you would know a turbo Firecat, obviously the way that they sound, it's a turbine. You can see the turbine engines on the side, or on the side here, and the big external tanks. So, and like I said, the wings are the same as an S2A and all that. So, and in terms of the Firecats and their service, I think there's a few of them left in service, but a lot of them, I guess, were retired. I'm not 100% sure on why. I guess there was some reports of there were some fatigue issues with the wing in them, and that's why a lot of them were getting retired, or they are completely retired. Um, and I think that's why France is going to other platforms too, is that they just basically have aged out. They're just too old, I guess. Um, so yeah, and in terms of that, the like I said before, the Turbo Firecats are about 250 miles per hour, so pretty fast. And then their maneuvering speed's very low in the low 100 knot range, 200 or 120 knots. That's about where their drop speed is. So um, now we'll get to the other turbine conversion, the S2F3AT. Now, off the bat, you're like, it's another turbo conversion. There's not much difference. Well, we'll start out dimensionally and kind of work our way back from there. The S2, this is also an S2T. I know you'll hear me kind of go back and forth between S2F3AT and S2T. Basically, in Cal Fire Service, they all call them an S2T. So that's basically what I'll just keep calling it to not have to stretch out the whole name. But this version of the S2T is actually 1.5 feet longer than the other version. So 43.5 feet, a little bit more than that. 43.6 feet long. So, and the wingspan was stretched additionally as well to a little over 72 feet. So they're longer, wider, and they carry more retardant. These carry 1,200 gallons versus 900 in the Turbo Firecat and 800 in the S2A. So the other thing that's different between these is the power plants. The power plants in these are Garrett TPE 331s, and they make 1,650 horsepower each. So they're the most powerful versions of any of the S2s. They're also the fastest. Their cited top speed is 270 miles per hour, or about 235-ish knots. There's some unwritten stuff around other places and things that say that's merely their cited top speed. They're actually considerably faster than that. I guess in certain circumstances, they're cleared to go as fast as 300 miles per hour, or 250-ish knots, 240, high 240-ish knot range. So I guess that's kind of the unwritten uh, aspect of their performance. That's how much more powerful these are than any of the other versions. The only other notable difference between, maybe you can see the bulge from the larger retardant tank in the belly, is the nose. The nose is pointy. That's another quick way to know that this is a Marsh conversion S2T or it's a Conair Turbo Firecat conversion. Um, the only other way, really, you could probably tell is if you're looking at one of these from underneath as it flew over you. These have a rounded wingtip. That's another thing you can tell probably off the bat. The S2A and the Turbo Firecat have a square tip wing. Also, too, if you look at the engine nacelle, you'll notice that the exhaust port is a giant one right in the center of the nacelle as opposed to further forward, like on the Turbo Firecat. Just little airframe differences I like to point out like that. I call it airframe autism. You like to compare the differences between all the different airframes. Even though it's based on the same airframe, there's marginal differences between all of them, and that's kind of why I wanted to do this video. It was like, hey, these are all the differences between the S2 air tankers that are out there, because there's, like I said, 3 different main versions of them. So, and with the, like I was saying, kind of to expand further on the history of the airplanes, the the Conair Firecat, Turbo Firecats are kind of on their way out of service, while the ones that Cal Fire are using, they're trying to extend their life as long as possible because they consider them invaluable assets. Basically, a few years back, I read a few articles saying that they even looked at replacing S2Ts, and they would cost anywhere between 3 and 4 times what they cost originally to replace them or get something that's a similar performance number as this is. And basically, from the numbers I read, it costs about $3 million each to do the conversions on these, and it would take, they said, maybe as much as $10 million to get a replacement for each one of these. So to get an airplane that's remotely close to this, and I think it was compared to the CL-415. That would be the closest operational airplane to this, but the S2Ts are even faster than they are, that the CL-215s are, 415s are. So it's rather interesting how unique of a platform that this became once it was modified for firefighting. It's basically its second calling, if you will. Instead of a maritime patrol airplane, being an air tanker is kind of interesting. It also brings me to another kind of off tangent point about how some of these airplanes fly longer as fire bombers, air tankers, as they did as their commercial counterpart did, or the military original airframe did. And the fact that they're an air tanker gets cut out of a lot of these airplanes' histories like it didn't matter. But the only reason why some of them were even still flying is because they were converted into air tankers and kept airworthy. A lot of these B-17s you see out there in the world today, they were all air tankers, and that's the only reason they were still flying. And they were just chopped up and converted right back to being a wartime plane, a plane that they flew less time as than they did as an air tanker. So it's kind of an interesting thing when you start to look at airplane history and stuff like that. Again, more airplane autism type stuff. But the same thing goes for the S2Ts. The last S2F3 rolled off the assembly lines in the 1950s. And here it is, 2020s, the 2020s, and the airframe itself is still flying. And if you look at one today, they look like they were built in the last 10 years. They look brand new. And part of that is because of how invaluable they are and how well their maintenance is to keep them flying. But to keep on tangent, that's kind of the main differences between the three large versions or three big variants of the S2s. So, like I said, in the other versions of the S2As, the earlier versions, like I was saying, the only real differences were the manufacturers of the retardant tanks that got put in them. So it could be an Air Union tank, could be a Hemet-Valley Flying Service tank, etc., etc. But the airframe largely is the same, and the retardant capacity is basically the same. So, like I said, but in terms of kind of ending off this video in terms of like their history still, there's 23 S2F3ATs still left in service, and that's where they want to keep them. So there's 23 of them in service still. The interesting thing about the S2A is, though, all the CAL FIRE 1s, remember I mentioned, were retired. Several of them were bought in the last 10 years, I think it was, by a small company, and they were remade airworthy and are flying contract firefighting operations in places like Kansas. The Kansas Department of Forestry or Fire or Land Protection or whatever it is there in Kansas, they actually contract out and they still fly old radial engine S2A air tankers. So that's even crazier to me that they're not even a turbine conversion. They're still the original S2As that were converted in the 70s are still flying as air tankers to this day. It's crazy when you start to think about some of these airframes that are still working like that. But yeah, so anyway, I thought about doing this video. So maybe if you guys like them, I can do more like air tanker history videos or stuff that's related to that around them and kind of, like I said, share airplane autism. And if anybody's got a similar type of a thing, they might appreciate these type of videos. Hey, so if you like them, comment below and maybe we could do more of them. So thanks for tuning in and maybe tune to the next one.